Distinguished members and friends, welcome to our webcast on World Investment Report 2022, prepared by United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. As you know, World Investment Report is UNCTAD's premier publication on trends in foreign direct investment worldwide, and with particular attention to global value chains and sustainable development. The report provides detailed information and profound insights about the FDI flows around the globe, and it also captures regional and country differences. It is also a main reference to many of the following studies, including some of our own. And the report is launched today, and thanks to our esteemed colleagues in UNCTAD who prepared this important and highly appreciated anticipated report, we are able to bring you the highlights of it the same day. Today, Ms. Amelia Santos Paulino will be with us, who is the Chief Investment Issues and Analysis section of UNCTAD, and present the main findings of the report. Ms. Santos Paulino, welcome. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today.
Many thanks for the invitation. Thank you, and a pleasure to be here sharing the findings of the report.
Thank you. And before getting into the details of this year's report, which focuses on international tax reforms and sustainable investment as a main theme, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Ayşem Sargın, the chairperson of YASET, to welcome our guest and deliver her opening speech. Ayşem Hanım, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Serkan Bey. Distinguished members, guests, it's great to be with you today. Welcome to our special session today following the launch of the UNCTAD World Investment Report for 2021. This is the third year in a row that we broadcast the World Investment Report's launch in Turkey on the day of the release of this report and in presence of a senior representative from UNCTAD. On behalf of YASET's Board of Directors and members, Ms. Santos Paulino, we would like to thank you for being here. Ms. Santos Paulino is the Chief of Investment Issues and Analysis section at the Investment and Enterprise Division of UNCTAD. And today it will be special to hear from her firsthand what their findings are. 2021 was the recovery year for the global economy, as we all know. Following the big shock that we had in 2020, the massive recovery packages rolled out by the governments, the cost and availability of project finance helped support investment growth in 2021. Globally, there was a significant increase in M&As, mostly driven by supply chain security concerns, and we observed a similar trend in Turkey too. 2021 was also the year we validated that the key themes we adopted during the pandemic, like the digital economy, like the green transformation or supply chain resilience, are here to stay, and they will continue to shape the global investment landscape for the foreseeable future. So as we will soon see in Ms. Santos Paulino's presentation, 2021 turned out to be a good year for investments. Globally, the numbers are back to the pre-pandemic levels. If we stop the movie here, this would be a good news story. However, 2022 started with new challenges. As we all know, we have a war, and all the themes that we focused on in 2021 and even 2020 are somehow back on us, and we have to deal with them now in a very different financial environment too, when the world is now fighting against inflation. And we are now talking about issues like food security even. So this is another very challenging year. And what the future holds for us is yet to be seen. Next year, this time, hopefully we'll be looking at this report and seeing the impacts of all the major changes we have been through in 2022. Right here, I don't want to steal the thunder. I would like to stop and leave the floor to Ms. Santos Paulino, and she will be, first of all, I have to say, we are extremely anxious to hear about the contents, because last year there were some trends. Where are these investments going is a big question for us. Turkey has its unique position about investments, but we, as you said, we always want to have a more holistic view of what's happening globally. And that surely has an impact on Turkey beyond its own dynamics. We are looking forward to hearing your comments, Ms. Santos Paulina. Thank you again for being here with us today. Over to you.
Many thanks. I assume the floor is mine now. I would like to express my warm thanks to Jacet for having me for the first time presenting the findings of the report. I think the stage was set perfectly because there were two important messages in the opening. And again, let me thank the Secretary General and the Chairperson of Jacet for inviting us. And there were two important reflections. Yes, global investment flows recovered, but then after COVID, we thought we are regaining lost ground and we are going back to pre-pandemic levels of growth. And now we are facing a new global challenge. Yesterday, the Secretary General launched the second briefing on the impact of the war in Ukraine, and we can see different levels of impact, direct and indirect. I don't want to go into details into that dynamic, but we have to be conscious that whatever happens with FDI and the prospects of FDI will depend on the dynamics on the global economic and political environment. So basically, this year report, as usual, presents the latest trends in global foreign direct investment, including greenfield projects, international project finance deals, merger and acquisitions, and so on. Also, it presents a special dedicated session on investment and sustainable development goals as a request of the General Assembly. This is the third year that we report on SDGs, and a new session on investment in climate change. So I look forward to discussing that with you. And importantly, there is the theme chapter of the report, which is in the international reform of taxes and how this will change the international investment game for foreign direct investment and for multinationals. So I look forward to presenting and discussing these issues with you. So I will start by discussing the global investment trends and prospect, and I will bring to you also some findings related to the region and related to Turkey. So basically, as I said, and as it was rightly said in the opening remarks, FDI flow grew, recovering from pre-pandemic levels. And in 2021, they reached 1.6 trillion and increased by 2/3 from the low level observed in 2020. And that decline in 2020 was driven by the COVID pandemic. So the recovery shows significant rebound momentum with booming merger and acquisitions deals mostly, and rapid growth in international project finance. And I will come back to you to some of these issues basically when it comes to SDG investment, climate change investment, and so on. So this is the global picture. There is something that I would like to mention here is that in addition to the rapid growth of mergers and acquisitions and international project finance, the role that loose financing conditions and major infrastructure stimulus package played in this recovery, but it was mostly in the developed world. And that explained what I said earlier, that the recovery was not equal across regions. As I said earlier, the global environment for international business and cross-border investment has now changed dramatically. The war in Ukraine, on top of the lasting effects of the pandemic, which is causing a triple food, fuel, and finance crisis in many countries around the world. So this adds to the challenges that were earlier presented to us by COVID. Thus, there is uncertainty which affect investors' decisions, and this uncertainty put a significant downward pressure on global foreign direct investment in 2022. In the report, we show that we expect that global FDI flows will move on a downward track. This is the prediction. New project activity, as measured by our data, is already showing signs of an increased risk aversion by the side of investors. And preliminary data for the first quarter of 2022 shows the number of greenfield and project announcements down by 21%. And international project finance deals also declining by 4%. So the outlook, unfortunately, despite the rebound, is not entirely positive. Then moving on to the next analysis, I mean, we try to provide a global and also regional picture. This year, for the first time, the regional trends will be presented in an online-only report, although the first chapter discuss the main trends. There will be a full chapter online presenting all the different regions and the different data that is only online. So basically, the FDI recovery last year brought growth in all regions. In that we agreed. However, almost 3/4 of the global increase was due to the upswing in developed countries, where FDI in developed countries reached over $700 billion, more than double the 2020 level, so the first year post-pandemic. So the increase, as I said earlier, was mostly due to mergers and acquisition transactions and high levels of retained earnings of multinationals. And this we analyzed through looking at the profits of the top 5,000 MNEs. And this high level of, we see that the profitability for this group of companies more than doubled. So this was a major driver. And this was especially high, as I said before, because in developed countries, because of loose financial conditions and also because of government support, especially related to the pandemic support packages. But despite this high profit, the appetite from MNEs for investing in new productive capacity assets overseas remain weak. And this is shown by the greenfield data. We show in the report that greenfield investment numbers increased by only 11%, still 1/5 below pre-pandemic levels. The value of greenfield announcements remained flat in developing countries. So this is a cause of concern when we think about productive capacity investment and reconfiguration of global value chains and so on, and especially for the development prospect of the less developed countries. So overall, we show that FDI to developing economies grew much more slowly, as I said, but it still increased. The flows to developing countries as a group increased by 30%. So this was mainly driven by a strong growth performance in Asia and a partial recovery in Latin America and some rebound in Africa, mostly due to specific large infrastructure projects. Allow me to say that a development concern is that FDI flows to structurally weak, vulnerable countries, including those classified as LDCs. And I think this matters for your country, which hosts the Technology Bank for Least Developed Countries. FDI flows to structurally weak, vulnerable small economies rose only by 15%. Half of that of developing countries. And also FDI to landlocked economies, small island developing states remains very low. The combined FDI flows to these countries remain at less than 3%, specifically 2.5% of global flows, down from 3.5% in 2020. So it's a bleak picture for this group of countries, and as a development institution, we do care, and I'm sure that the investment community also cares about these issues. Moving on, to zoom in a little bit in the what is the picture here for developing Asia. We saw that FDI in developing Asia rose for the third consecutive years. So despite the different ways of COVID, there was a recovery in developing Asia, underscoring the resilience of the region. Developing Asia is the largest recipient region of FDI in the world, accounting for 40% of global FDI inflows. FDI in West Asia increased by 59% to 55 billion from 35 billion in 2020, mainly driven by a significant increase in cross borders M&A, which is a reflection also of the global picture. Some economies, just to mention a few, for example, while the United Arab Emirates remain the largest recipient with flows at 20 billion, inflows more than tripled in Saudi Arabia and an increase also in the Republic of Turkey. So this is a bit of a flavor of what is going on in the region. Moving on, here I like also to discuss the interregional flows in terms of greenfield project announcements. And as we can see here, intra-regional greenfield project announcement fell to 35% of total projects announced in developing Asia, remaining flat at 24% in terms of value. And this compares to a higher value way before the pandemic in 2016. Then looking at projects invested in by Asian MNEs, 41%, almost 50% by value, were in the region. So there was a significant activity, intra-regional activity, down from 48% in 2016. So still, this is a good news that at least there is some important activities, but extra-regional greenfield announcement increased. So it will be interesting to look more into this dynamic. I am conscious of time, but this is an important area of analysis in the report, and this is investment in the sustainable development goal. This is a section that we have been, as I said at the beginning, reporting on different cross-border investment flows into SDG sectors. And I think it's very important as a reflection of we are getting closer to the 2030 agenda, and still the investment gap to meet the development goals has not been closed. And there is still a significant need for private international investment in SDG-related sectors. In the report, just moving to the right figure. So in the report, we show that cross-border investment in SDG sectors in developing economies. This analysis concerns developing countries and transition economies because of the nature of the agenda. So cross-border investment in SDG sectors in developing economies was growing before the COVID-19 pandemic, although not at a sufficient rate to fill the SDG investment gap. So international investment was significantly hit the first year of the pandemic. And last year, we reported double-digit decline across all sectors except renewable energy. This year, we see a recovery, overall investment recovery in international investment to SDG-related sectors, increasing substantially by 70%. But this increase was mostly in the renewable energy sector. So again, like in overall investment, the recovery has been highly unequal. This figure here shows project activity. That is the combined value of greenfield announcements and international project finance deals in SDG sectors. And we see a recovery, but apart from the renewable energy sector, only investment activity in education fully recovered to pre-pandemic levels. Other sectors, including health, food and agriculture, physical infrastructure, and water and sanitation provision for household and hospital remain partially recovered. So again, we are seeing a very skewed trend and mostly driven by developed countries' investments. And this is an issue that we try to explain in detail in the report. Chapter 5, chapter 4 of the printed edition also explains the trends in sustainable development goals and the upstream investment section. So this is, we unfortunately I cannot go into detail due to time's constraint, but this is an issue that we paid a lot of attention and we try to monitor in our quarterly global investment trends monitor as well. So moving on, being conscious of time, the second chapter of the report looks at the policy developments, recent policy developments, both at the national and international levels. And I will be very brief here, but if you are interested in look at the transition, especially how the pandemic and post-pandemic and now the response to the global crisis has driven national and international policy making, I'll invite you to read the report. So the first thing that I would like to discuss with you is the pace of the reform. So basically, we have seen that investment policy making is slowed down in the sense that the share of measures less favorable to investment reached a new record. It was basically there is being a convergence between most and less favorable investment measure because of all the packages introduced during the pandemic, that it was beneficial for some but had some negative effects in other countries. So what we see in the report is that in 2021, the pace of investment policy making returned to pre-pandemic levels, signaling an end to the emergency investment policy making that characterized the first year of the pandemic, and those what we're seeing as restrictive investment policies. We see also in the report that developed countries expanded the protection of strategic companies from foreign takeover, bringing the share of less favorable policy measures to an all-time high of 42%. So this increase that we see in the orange line, of 42%, is mostly driven by protectionist policies of developed countries for strategic sectors. We also in the report look at what we call international investment. In addition to the national dimension, we look at what is happening in the international investment treaty and bilateral investment treaty arena. You know the report, and we try to make an effort to keep a track on the new generation of international investment agreements. So we show that in 2021, countries concluded 13 international investment agreements. And as in 2020, the number of the effective treaty terminations exceeded that of new IIAs. That is, there were more terminations than new international investment agreements. Also, in 2021, countries concluded at least, these agreements that included bilateral investment treaties and 7 treaties with investment promotion, so that they are not exclusively investment treaties, but they are agreements that have investment promotion that we call TIPS. So this brought the size of the universe to 3,288 investment agreements. So in addition, those that I mentioned that enter into force contributed to have a universe of 2,558 by the end of the year. So basically, there is a dynamic, but still there is a big gap between the new agreements and especially those that are called new generations of investment policy. What this year, as I will move on to discuss the third chapter, we will see that the reforms to the international tax regime will have implications not only for the national policy making, but also for international agreements and bilateral investment treaties. So with this, if you allow me, I will move to the third chapter of the report. You please let me know when I'm running out of time. So here, as I said at the beginning, this has important implications because these reforms basically will change the rules of the game and the rules for international investment. And at the moment, there are not there is not an option to remain outside of this new system, new regime. At some point, even those countries that have not signed will have to converge, because this brings a new landscape to international policy making. So turning to the chapter of the report, please allow me to show you this general picture. So basically, what do we do here? We try to look at the implications for investment and investment policymakers of the introduction of a global minimum tax on multinationals. A minimum tax of 15% of foreign profits of the largest MNEs has been proposed by the G20 and the OECD Base Erosion and Profit Sharing BEPS project. So we focus on this second phase of the BEPS project. So the so-called BEPS Pillar 2 is expected to discourage multinational enterprises from shifting profits to low-tax countries and to reduce tax competition between developing countries. In the report, we show what will be the change in FDI due to this new tax system, and it will depend on the effective existing tax rate. So it goes from the war will be around globally 40%, and if we look at developed economies, 16%. But for developing countries, the implication is lower because already the taxes rates are lower, so around 9%. And in Asia, will imply 8% change. So basically, what we try to look is, what does it mean and what are the implications in terms of fiscal incentives for developing countries? And basically what we see is that it will depend on the policy design of each country. We know that, for example, for the case of special economic zones, many countries rely on tax incentives, on tax holidays, corporate, and many types of incentives, including corporate tax holidays and so on, but this will change the rules of the game. So, as I said before, this BEPS Pillar 2 will increase the corporate income tax faced by multinationals on their foreign profits. This is why the focus is in profit shifting. And then the estimated rise in the effective tax rate faced by MNEs is conservatively estimated at 2% points. This is our conservative estimate given the applied rate and the actual effective tax rate. This will correspond to an increase in tax revenues paid by multinationals to host countries of about 15%, more for large multinationals that are directly affected by the reform. So both developed and developing economies are expected to benefit substantially from the increase in, basically due to increase in revenue collections. But there is an issue here that we also analyzed in previous years WIR, and is what does it mean for investment move through offshore financial centers, what's called special entities. So basically, offshore financial centers stand to lose substantially as part of revenues collected from foreign eminent foreign affiliates. So this is one of the objectives, to regulate this deviation of profit through offshore centers. For smaller developing countries, the application of the top-up tax could make a major difference in revenue collection. If you remember the previous figure, developing countries, had a lower tax rate, so it will have a major difference in terms of revenue collection. But there is a flip side to this. The flip side of the increased tax revenue is the potential downward pressure on investment that the increase in tax on FDI activities could cause. But here there will be also a reduction in the tax rates differences between countries, which could result in the diversion of investment from low to high tax jurisdiction. I know this is very technical. I'm trying to be as general as possible, but basically, in terms of the developing countries, could benefit relatively more from that. They could benefit relatively more because, on average, they have higher corporate tax rates. However, they will not benefit automatically. I mean, in a world of smaller tax rates differences, countries stand to gain more from improvements in other investment determinants. So here the competition on investment will not be only on tax, but those related to infrastructure and to the broader regulatory and institutional environment, where developing countries are at a disadvantage. So there could be a tax equalization, but developing countries will have a lot of work to do in terms of the infrastructure and the regulatory environment to attract investment. So this is basically the major issue that we try to explain in the report. For this complicated conundrum that I know is difficult to explain, we can have a separate conversation on this. We present a very well-elaborated recommendations for the international community. And this includes not only policymakers, but also includes investors and international investment associations and special economic zones associations. So basically, from the report, we can say that the Pillar 2 reforms will have major implications for national investment policymakers and for investment promotion institutions and for their standards toolkits. Like the toolkits basically tend to start with fiscal incentives, so that will have to change. So in this sense, fiscal incentives, we all know here, are widely used for investment promotion, including as part of value proposition of most special economic zones. And Turkey is a country that has important special economic zones as an industrial and trading hub and investment hub. So in this context, investment policymakers need urgently to review their incentive packages, both from existing and new investors, and revise them depending on how they are affected by the reform. So there is some homework to do here. So in the report, we present a guide on how to do this. I present it here on the screen. So basically, we propose, and I think that will be needed. Last week, I was in Ghana in a workshop with the special economic zones stakeholders, and basically, it is clear the need for technical assistance for developing countries to support the BEPS 2 process, and especially in terms of implementation and policy adjustment. Also, we need to think about a multilateral solution to implement to remove implementation constraints posed by the international investment agreements, and to mitigate potential risks of investment dispute settlements, because this is also a risk that we will face when this new system comes in. And then another issue that we put in our key recommendation is a stop-gap measure, which is established mechanism to return any top-up revenue raised by developed home countries that should have accrued to developing countries, but that they were unable to raise because of the capacity of treaty complaints. So there should be a mechanism for these countries that will have an increase in tax rates to how to redistribute this top-up tax. So this is a complex issue that experts have to sit around the table and see how they will do this. But again, the World Investment Report has a very detailed guide to policymakers and to stakeholders like international investment associations on how to do this. And we look forward to continue the conversation on this. I'm conscious of time. I will move quickly to the other part of the report. And as I said, I invite you to read the report and see the different tool guides that we present for all stakeholders around the table. So now I'll move to the final chapter of the report, chapter 4, that looks at capital markets and sustainable finance. So here we try to moving a bit away from the international tax reform. We want to look at what is going on in the capital markets and how sustainable finance can help to complement international downstream private investment on SDGs. So here we see a very encouraging picture. So we see that sustainable finance is growing exponentially. So in the report, we estimate that the value of sustainability-themed investment products in global financial markets amounted to 5.2 trillion in 2021. That is an increase of 63% from 2020. These products include sustainable funds, green bonds, and other sustainable linked bonds. So it's a positive trend, but the concern is that this is mostly moving around developed countries. They are not reaching developing countries on the ground. In the report, we also look at the role that stock exchanges are playing in this setting. We show that the fast growth of sustainable finance is positive and encouraging, and there are two critical aspects to this. One is that most sustainable funds are domiciled in developed countries, as I said before, and they target assets in developed markets. So developing economies are largely bypassed by this trend. The second concerns remain about greenwashing. And this is important because there are so many different reporting standards. So the main about greenwashing and the real impact of these sustainability-themed investment products. Perhaps they are growing, they are large, but in the face value, the impact on the green investment is not that positive. And this is because most of these products are self-labeled. So they self-certify themselves as green. And there is a lack of consistent standards and high-quality data to assess the sustainability credentials of these funds. So this is a concern of UNTAD, and we have been discussing this the last few years. And then what we are doing about this, to conclude, first we have our own partnership with institutional investors. In 2021, we work with public pension funds, which held more than 22 trillion in assets. So institutional investor can have a significant influence over the market through asset allocations and active ownership. Also, there is the issue that not all large pension funds and sovereign wealth funds report on ESG, on sustainability issues. So the issue of reporting is important, and we at UNCTAD push for mandatory ESG reporting. And this not only goes about general green impact, but also in issues like gender and disclosure of gender standards. So we also, not only investors have a role to play, but also in the report we show that exchanges also have an important role in promoting gender equality. And there are many events, including Ring the Bell initiatives and part of the UN Global Compact that have important implications. And third, last year at the World Investment Forum in October, we launched the Global Sustainable Finance Observatory in order to address these issues. So we try to combine our Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, the Institutional Investors Program, and the Institutional Program for Accounting and Reporting, ISAR. And also we are committed to work through all these entities and to bring together key private and public stakeholders to increase the contribution of financial markets to the SDGs. So I will stop here. I think I used all my time, and thank you so much again for having me. I give the floor back over to you, and thank you again. Thank you very much. I tried to walk you through the whole report. We have different rich themes, and so let me just finish with 2 words. So
Sure.
we have to. It's not an option to remain outside of the global tax reform of the Pillar 2. I think at some point we need to raise awareness, and second, we need to think more carefully about the income effect, the marginal effect on FDI and on revenue collections. And as investors, you have the voice to raise with your counterpart in the national governments. Thank you very much, and I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. So please, Ayşem Hanım, after your initial feedback, maybe we can proceed with the questions. Thank you.
Sure. I was just going to thank Ms. Santos Paulino for this comprehensive description, assessment of the report, let's say. But then there's a lot more we need to absorb in the report, I'm sure. One thing that's striking to me is the increase that developed countries recorded from last year. So that was really important for all of us to see. And then the difference, I think the increase was 134% for developed countries versus a 30% increase in developing countries for last year. So I understand how and why, after a year full of risks, the investors are risk averse. They don't want to take even small risks, and that's why they're leaning towards these countries. And possibly all the themes that we mentioned were on top of our agenda about digital transformation, green transformation. These issues are also at a more advanced stage in these developed economies. So my mind tells me, okay, here's why. But then what's next is the big question, because there are all the rest of the world. And what happens to developing economies in the upcoming period will be really important, given all the economic challenges that we're all going through nowadays. I know this is not in the report, Ms. Santos Paulino, but it would be great during your remarks in the Q&A somewhere if you could share your views with us. What's next really for the rest of the world to attract some investment? What does it take for us to attract more investment in such a complicated period?
Can I jump back?
Please go ahead.
Yes, I think the observation is very good, and I mean this has been largely the increase. As I said, there is a difference between the positive trend in developed and comparison to the, although positive but way smaller trend in developing countries. And again, this was largely driven by Europe and North America. And it has to do with the stimulus packages that developed countries can afford to provide to the investors. So this is the fiscal space is not the same, and this is an issue of concern, and also on investment activity and in terms of profit relocation. There are two things here. We expect that these international reforms of the tax regime will level a little bit the playing field in terms of investors and in terms of behavior and profit shifting. This is one thing. The other issue is if you see both the investment and the financial markets, this drive of the renewable energy market. And even in Africa, we saw in the infrastructure sectors, some recovery, but this is largely driven by, again, natural renewable energy and by very large projects. So to level the play, how flows can go to other developing countries, it has to do with the assertive capacity of countries to initiate this type of projects. I mean, usually these large infrastructure projects face a very high risk profile, so investors are very careful. If we go back to last year's report where we analyzed international project finance, we see that developing countries are getting less than 10% of these flows. So it has to do with the capacity, the assertive capacity of these countries to reach this, to attract and to initiate this type of high-profile projects. So those projects that we see, for example, in vulnerable economies, they have very high-profile investors. We have a very interesting, for example, in the case of West Africa, there is a very interesting project to bring connectivity across West Asia. There are large projects on other big infrastructure, but also we have to remember that in many cases the participation of the public sector is essential when it comes to what is considered pure public goods vis-a-vis investment that can be undertaken only by the private sector. So the whole institutional framework here matters, and also the investment promotion package matters. And just going back to the issue of what can we do on the landscape, for example, to give you a data from Turkey, and that's Turkey, the role that is playing in the region and in other developing countries. In the report, we show that FDI outflows from your country increased by almost 70%. So investment is flowing to other countries, and we did also some analysis for the first time looking at FDI by small and medium enterprise, and because we want to see, okay, we tend to focus on the large M&Es, but what is going on in Asia? We see a lot of innovation and investment coming from smaller M&Es, and your country has a specific, a very important role in South-South investment and investment with countries at similar level of development. So this is an encouraging sign. But again, we have to go back to the drawing board and think like there are issues of institutional capacity that does not allow some countries to initiate large project that is attracted for high-profile investors.
Thank
And
you
I
so
invite you
much.
to look at the climate change session where we have a table presenting the different profiles of investors, at what type of projects they might be inclined to go to in terms of climate change and mitigation, to give you an example, but that will translate to any large infrastructure project.
Thank you so much. This is a tough question, and we'll see next year. This time, we'll probably have the answers to these questions: how successful developing countries can be in getting over this hurdle. Thank you so much. Let me turn over to Serkan Bey for maybe
Sure.
managing the
Thank you very
questions
much.
too.
Thank you very much. We have lots of questions from the audience, and some shows that the report has already been downloaded and studied. So which is a good thing. Yeah, interest is so high. And
That's
the
a
first
tough one.
question, yeah, the first question, and to begin with, the report always provides great inputs for us, but this time it really provides substance for our live agenda. And there are some things that we are acting upon, like sustainability credentials and supporting and dissemination of these ones into the industry and all the producers. So there are direct links. So I'm sure that we are going to be deliberating on the report more with you in your available time. But a quick question is coming about these tax reforms. Actually, it is actually a hot issue in Turkey, as just yesterday a new legislation was discussed in the parliament aiming to make Turkey one of the regional or at least global hubs as an international finance center. And do you think that it would be comparatively harder for countries to become regional or global hubs as competition via tax incentives loses its power? And maybe one associated question: a colleague just reminded us a study carried out by IMF a few years ago. Almost 40% of global FDI flows were composed of phantom FDI, that are those investments towards offshores. And after the adoption of this global minimum tax rate, do you anticipate a dramatical decrease in the global FDI inflows after 2023?
I think that they are very, very, very good questions and very pertinent. So basically, this is what we are trying to address here: the impact on taxation. Now we see that more or less our conservative estimate is that investment will go down around 2% if we assume an across the border 15% tax rate. And here, remember, as the figure that I showed, that there was some equalization factors because some countries had very high corporate tax rates, whereas others they were very low. So assuming that it converts to a 15%, our estimates for global FDI is 2%. In terms of the profit, I mean, when we analyze FDI data, we already incorporate the methodology that we developed a few years ago in terms of what is called phantom FDI. So this is real investment, not including offshore. We present the data excluding offshore financial centers. So this is already accounting it for. And yes, this is our conservative estimate of around 2%, assuming an equalization. So this will be more or less assuming that the reform take place and many countries go on board. Yes.
Thank you very much. And you also mentioned about the UNCTAD research project that examines the internalization process of SMEs, which is a hot issue in Turkey as well, because some e-commerce companies and technology companies really internationalized last year, directly pointing out the issue you stated or the development you stated, the FDI outflows. And would you please give us some more insights about that report? What the report will tell us about this SME aspect?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Actually, this is a new research project that we started this year, and the aim is to have a full report on FDI by SMEs. It started, because in the last time we looked at the issue was in the 90s and focusing on Asia. And since then, most of the debate has been about increasing productivity and then allowing SMEs to export. But the phenomenon of FDI by SMEs is an important one. Unfortunately, we saw a decline, and still the greenfield, we focus on greenfield investment because this is the comparable data, remains low, but it's increasing in sectors that doesn't require a high level setup cost, that is digital, information technology, and so on. And again, we see a lot of regionalization, countries tending to invest in countries similar level of development, are very positive trends in countries like Turkey, Korea, that is has a long tradition of what they call technology SMEs and having a positive spillover. So we presented the first cutout of the data in the World Investment Report, but then the second phase will include case studies comparing different regions. So in Latin America, Turkey, we see a lot of regional investment, which tends to by SMEs, and then also in these sectors, basically, that again don't require a high setup cost. I look forward to sharing the report with you at the end of the year, and we can have you as also in the peer review meeting, because I think it's important to have also the views from the sector.
Thank you very much. Another question is actually related to the mapping of green policies and policy tools. That's a really viable representation of countries' comparative analysis about what they are doing and how they are prepared for the green agenda. And we also shared this document with related counterparts in the government also, and they announced that we are going to be ready soon with more strategies and tools for adapting the green policies. But the question is, we observe a considerable escalation in the volume of sustainability-themed investment funds and bonds, despite still taking up a small portion. And they're, of course, concerned about, as you mentioned, greenwashing problem. And can we conclude from this picture that the nations which internalize the sustainability-related reporting standards will get the competitive edge in attracting sustainability-themed finance to themselves?
I think it's a very good question, but I will say not only for themselves, but also to promote investing in other countries and regions, because remember there is the risk, the reputation effect for investors to be associated with projects and investment that respect ESG standards. And again, the UN Global Compact has been a driver of this, and the work that UNTAD is doing. I don't think it's an option anymore, but still is a risk, because this issue of self-reporting and self-labeling. And still, if we look at the reporting of the top 100, like gender, only 23, around 23, 25 report on gender. But this is, yes, this will have a positive spillover, because it's corresponding to a global agenda, a global standard agenda. And these issues, I think, are taken more seriously by financiers and by investors. Yes, and the aim is that these funds will reach not only developed country markets, but will make it to developing countries as well. And for example, something that we show in the report is that the drive in Europe, what is the European Union and the corporate sector continue to push on social and mixed sustainability bond issues, not only the green agenda, but also the social agenda. And again, not only looking at bonds issuers, but an institutional investors like sovereign wealth funds is important, because they might they might have an important role to play in changing the dynamics.
Thank you. And the questions are endless, but due to the time limitations, we are going to stop forwarding them, but we'll be in touch with the details of it. Thank you very much for this detailed presentation and the comments and insights you provided, Ms. Santos Paulina. Thank you very much. And we will be reading this comprehensive report in detail and also suggest all our stakeholders to follow up UNCTAD's publication, which give a holistic perspective on issues related to global trade and investments. And we will, of course, be announcing them. And please say hi to all esteemed members of UNCTAD team, including Secretary General Rebecca Greenspan, Director James Sun, and our dear friend Richard Baldwin. And before I give the floor to Ayşe for closing up, I have one announcement to make. As we did last year, following this great presentation and launch, this webcast will be followed by two more webcasts. One will be with dear Sinan Ülgen, Director of Istanbul Economy, with whom we will be discussing the interaction between contemporary international relations and their effect on trade and investments. And after that, President of Presidency Investment Office, Mr. Ahmet Burak Dağlıoğlu, will be with us on our concluding webcast, where we will evaluate Turkey's FDI performance and policies with a forward-looking perspective. Ms. Santos Paulina, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure having you, and I'm leaving the floor to you and Ayşe Hanım.
Many thanks. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Santos Paulina. I can only second what Serkan Bey said about your presentation. It was really valuable for us. There's a lot to talk about, think about, and really, I'm not sure how we'll all sleep by the time we hear about this year's report, because there are a lot of new developments, new concerns, never a dull moment in the investment zone. We'll keep following your reports, UNCTAD's reports, and hopefully we'll stay in touch, keep each other updated too. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity again, and looking forward to keeping in touch and continue the conversation. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our friends and stakeholders. Thank you. Stay healthy, stay safe until our next webcast. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.